Hello, and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we're reviewing Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga. Directed by George Miller, Furiosa is set in a desert wasteland where warlords fight over the last remaining sources of water, food, weapons, and gasoline. Furiosa traces a young Furiosa's life from her kidnapping by the forces of warlord Dementis and her struggle to survive as a slave. Furiosa stars Anya Taylor-Joy, Alyla Browne, and Chris Hemsworth. So Jeffrey, what do you think about Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga?
Sometimes when I get sad, I get depressiosa. So this is the fifth film in the Mad Max series. They're really interesting. Like the first one is this ultra low budget thriller. It was made for an insanely low amount of money. And it's basically like an exploitation film. It's violent, it's cold, and it's very short. The first two films are like 90 minutes long, which is funny that we get these big epics now. The second one is more when like the breathlessness comes. So the second one's called The Road Warrior. Car chases, random violence, vigilante style, shotguns. That's the one that I really like. And then the third film is the first time that we get a larger budget, larger set pieces, and I think that was made in the 80s, and then obviously we didn't have a Mad Max film for a long time until Fury Road. So it's a very interesting progression getting to Fury Road, which came out with, a monstrous budget, like a massive technical feat just of both stunt work and set design, vehicle design and costuming, and all of these amazing below the line things that all of these people work so hard on were on all of these Oscars. The first three Mad Max films I think are well enough known in like the lore of film, but I don't know how much they're actually watched nowadays outside of film people. I could be wrong about that, but that's just my estimation of it. But anyway, Fury Road explodes onto the scene. It's a fairly large hit at the box office, and I think it wins all these Oscars, and maybe most notable of all is the critics love it. It's called one of the best action films of, the past decade or so.
And Charlize Theron was a standout as Furiosa.
Yeah. So Furiosa is a prequel to Fury Road, and we get a much more epic, long, multifaceted, multi-arced film that spans about 20 years, whereas like Fury Road spans like a day. Something I didn't know about this film going into it was that Anya Taylor-Joy doesn't show up until like halfway through the film. Before that, she's the character Furiosa is played by
Alyla.
Yep.
Browne, yeah.
So I'm just trying to kind of paint the picture here that the film is a lot slower, a lot more meditative. It has these extended scenes of space and tension and world building. And yes, occasionally some breathless action sequences, but far less so than Fury Road. Fury Road, for all its excitement and like the extraordinary tech craft, the story was good and it was exciting, but it was basically like good guy good, bad guy bad. Nobody like really thinks about the story in Fury Road of why it's such a positive attribute for the film. The way in which this film, I think, takes the best of Fury Road while embellishing the world and the characters is really what I liked most about it, giving us a little bit of room to breathe in this world that's so interesting to be a part of.
I couldn't agree more. It definitely turned out to be a little bit more quiet than I expected, and that is nothing against the film at all. I think it has some amazingly drawn technical sequences and stunt work.
And it does have some amazing action sequences. It's just not wall-to-wall action sequences.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The film is really more centered around the discussion about vengeance, and I think the film caters more to that than the action, which works more as a supplement to the narrative in the story. That being said, I think the action is absolutely second to none. There's some amazing sequences that I mentioned that features parachutes. The mechanics of the rig itself are really well done and interesting. There's these like hanging balls that I noticed in the beginning when they first put it together.
Yeah.
And I was
like, are these truck nuts?
Yeah, and I thought that was just a joke at first, but they have an actual practical purpose. And so when that happened, I thought that was really cool.
They do a very good job in that sequence in particular of showing you all the different parts so that you can understand tactilely how it works. So there's also this pole that goes back and forth so you can get to one side to the other. It has a really good way of building up and showing you the ways in which this sequence works so that when you're in the middle of it, you can kind of anticipate some of the things that are coming in a fun way that builds suspense.
I completely agree. And you were mentioning the actors a little bit, so I want to center on those for a few moments. Anya Taylor-Joy, I thought was absolutely exceptional. And I thought along with Alyla Browne, who plays Furiosa as a child, I thought they just made a wonderful pair. There's this like such a stark difference between these two, but I feel that so much of the change that happens within Furiosa's character happens in Alyla's version of her. We see so much of this loss of innocence and happiness that fades away from her existence to someone who becomes very stern and unreadable almost. She's just sitting in these cages and she just looks blank. She's just staring blankly into the world. Anya Taylor-Joy really carries these characteristics into a woman who is very certain and very calculating and honestly just a downright badass.
I'm such a sucker for a good like revenge story. Maybe that's why I always get along with Quentin Tarantino so much. He's so like fiercely preoccupied with revenge. But anyway, this film, maybe you want to criticize its story and saying, oh, well, this is like a fairly simple vengeance or revenge story. I don't know. I thought it was pretty exciting. I really enjoy a revenge story when somebody is able to take a bad thing that happened to them and inflict it back upon their perpetrator.
But what I love so much about her character is the vengeance is almost secondary to her main goal, which is just to get home.
Yeah.
But these people won't let her. They won't just let her go.
I'd hesitate to say this if it wasn't in the trailer, but there's a scene where she could say something like, I want to inflict pain on you in some badass way, but instead she chooses to say, give me them back.
Yeah, I have more to say on that in a little bit. Speaking of Chris Hemsworth's character, I thought he made a very compelling villain. I thought he did a great job navigating a character who was at first in control and ruthless to someone who is losing control and also becomes much more desperate in that loss of control.
Yeah, he's kind of like a bumbling idiot by the end of this movie. And he's like somebody that almost found himself in power. I'm not sure through any like positive attributes or strength of his own will, but more just like the circumstances worked out that way and now he doesn't know what to do. So I really liked Hemsworth's performance and I actually think it mostly fit with the film. There's also these two characters that are buffoons who are the son of Immortan Joe. Just these two morons who like don't understand anything and are always arguing. All the while, like all these things are happening around them that they're like completely oblivious to. So anyway, I think that Chris Hemsworth's character is kind of in the same vein. He's somebody who's so blinded by his masculine rage that he just doesn't see a lot of the things around him and how he's screwing everything up. I think that's really funny, but it adds to a quality of the film that I didn't always love, which is this madcap absurdity about it. George Miller has always kind of had that streak, and I think Fury Road actually had a bit of that too. It's almost like a film that's a parody of itself at times, and I think that Hemsworth usually is pretty good in the film, but there are a couple times, particularly in the one-on-one sequence towards the end, he plays for laughs that didn't totally work for me, that brought me out of the film a little bit. But in general, I did like his performance. Those couple of times that I was taken out of the film happened to be on his watch.
Interesting, because I disagree with that sentiment, but I need to explain that a little bit later when we talk specifics on the ending.
Okay. So something I really liked is the world building, the places and people we see outside the Citadel. The first three films, I was talking about them earlier in the review, but they're very small scale productions. That's mostly like you just see the desert. You don't really get to see how this world functions in any way. And we get deeper explorations of Bullet Town, Gas Town, this tremendous action sequence in Bullet Town that lets us see all of the details of it. We also get to see the green place where Furiosa came from and a glimpse of the female-led environment that she was raised in. These places are really quickly shown or alluded to in the earlier film, and I just really like seeing how the economy or like different parts of this world are functioning outside of just the Citadel.
Yeah, I really loved how the film expanded on those places and locations.
Just as with Fury Road, there's just like an absolute burst of creativity and imagination just in every single frame of this movie. The details and the costuming and the set design and the vehicles, it has this really eccentric, just oddity-laden quality to it that I know George Miller is known for. It actually almost reminds me of Guillermo del Toro. If you look in the background of some really great Guillermo del Toro films, such as like Pan's Labyrinth or even the Hellboy films, there are all these like amazing creatures and bizarre costumes and all kinds of interesting shops and gadgets and artifacts. And I really like how lived in this world is. It's just been living in George Miller's brain, and somebody gave him $100 million to do all these wild things. There's a part where Furiosa wakes up in like the underground, and there are these underground people that eat maggots. So anyway, we just get the high ground, the low ground, the bottom, the top of this world in this film that I really like. Like I like how much it was expanded. Even though this film is an epic and I like how it goes on all those different directions, it does, I think, sag occasionally. I think a middle ground between Fury Road's absolute relentlessness and breathlessness and the more slow pace, languid pace of this film that is maybe the perfect medium. But anyway, I think the film in general is like very, very well done, but there are, a couple of times.
So why don't we just go into spoilery details of the movie if you're ready for that. So if you haven't seen the film, I recommend watching Furiosa and then coming back to this review.
Yeah, I liked it. You liked it. Go see it. If you,
We liked it, yes. I want to talk about the way Furiosa loses her arm. I had this expectation going in of just like, oh, something was going to chop her arm off.
Yeah,
but I always so much more of this moment.
I always think of this because prequels have so much baggage to answer questions. One of the worst examples of this is I can think of in Solo when he is like, oh, you're alone? Then your last name is Solo. Those films have to find interesting ways ways to give us what we want. Which anyway, I'll let you go back to the arm sequence that I think is a great example of that, like using our expectations against us.
So they're in this drive battle, and her arm gets stuck between the car and the big rig. It gets torn up, but it's not disconnected. It's still usable. But then we come to this moment where she is hung up. She decides the only way she could free herself is by cutting off her arm. To us isn't shown, but all of a sudden we just see her limb just hanging there in the chain.
Yeah, and I think the way it's revealed to the audience is brilliant. The way that we're not showing her for a while, and then we're like, "Where's Furiosa?" and you just see the arm there, and you're like, "Yes."
Yeah,
it's a very cool way to deal with that baggage that we were talking about of prequels.
All right, so this is going to go into my discussion about her character and Chris Hemsworth's character, because I feel like they are diametrically opposed characters in the way they're dealing with grief. And I think that is the main lesson of the story. Going from that arm bit, what does Furiosa do? She ends up building a new arm that she could use. When this argument comes down at the end, he is almost acting like a man-child. What I love so much about this is it drew these lines between the two characters and how they deal with grief. And we know Chris Hemsworth's character is dealing with grief because he's carrying around this toy, this stuffed bear.
Yeah.
He mentions at one point during the movie that his kids and his family were taken from him. He's taking this loss and he's deciding to control and destroy. Furiosa, on the other hand, she is seeking to save and build something. I think that's represented in her arm. It's represented in her actions during that moment where she has the chance to kill him. And the movie does it. Oh, it said that she did this. Oh, it said she did that.
Yeah, the film's very interested in like lore and legend.
Yeah, but the final one that we end on is this tree where she has planted the seed in his body and his body's giving nutrients to the new fruit that is growing. But I love that the movie is really about these two characters who are taking their grief and their anguish and they're doing different things with it.
Yeah, and I don't have any issue with that, like philosophically speaking. I think it's more of a tonal shift issue. When I'm watching like a vengeance film and I'm really into Furiosa's like blind anger. So that has been built throughout the film. We're expecting some sort of payoff, like after a variety of extraordinary action sequences. We get a much quieter, more contemplative showdown. I like the fact that the film doesn't end with this giant oil tanker doing a bunch of spins and blowing up in the sand. I like that it has a more intimate setting, but because of that intimate setting, I did feel like some of his bumbling masculinity like went against some of the film's tone. It may have worked thematically, philosophically. I'm not totally sure it worked tonally.
All right, so you ready to go to grades?
I am ready to go to grades. I'm going to give this film a B. I think it is lovely. I really like that we start with where we were in the prior film at the Citadel and just start bringing this world into like a much bigger view. And we can see what other people are up to and other tribes and other civilizations within this world are up to. So I really liked it. I think it worked as a revenge story too. I think Furiosa's quiet intensity. There's all of these headlines about how she only has 30 lines in the film. She is an extraordinary presence in the film for how little she speaks. I thought it was mostly just a blast.
I completely agree. I give it a B+. I really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. I think, as you said, George Miller is so creative. There's just so much creativity throwing throughout these films. This being a prequel, it could have easily been such an easy cash grab. He's doing something more with it. He's trying to think about like, oh, let's think about vengeance and what that means for these characters. I really love that this film grapples with those different things, but also expands on the lore, expands on the locations. We talked about the sequences enough, but so many of these action sequences were just so cool. Just so much creativity.
The parachute scene is really extraordinary. It rivals anything in Fury Road, in my opinion. That's the thing I most appreciate about it, and it may sound like low expectations, but I feel like they all know that us fans of Fury Road are going to show up to this movie, and the fact that they didn't phone it in, and the fact that it was 10 years in them or 9 years in the making, I think really paid off in this film. So I'm glad that it worked out the way it did.
All right, and that's it for a review of Furiosa. Furiosa is now in theaters, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Let us know in the comments, what did you think about this film? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.